Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today on J Slay, Made in the USA, where we explore truth, expose deception, and inspire courage. And today I plan on doing all three. You know, Israel's been in the news a lot, especially with the recent attack from Iran. And most people don't know about the prior attack on the Iranian embassy by Israel. And those things need to be known. We want the whole story. And today, my guest is John Hankey. He's a researcher, a filmmaker, and a teacher out of Los Angeles who's taught English and history for 30 years. He's been a researcher and a public speaker about JFK's murder since 1972. And in his research, he relies almost exclusively on government documents, going back to the source of these things and using people or gathering information from those who have been on site at these events, especially as it relates to Israel on October 7th and the war since that time. So I saw part of that documentary a couple of weeks ago, and immediately I was like, I've got to contact this man. This is fantastic. And also I even knew about it because the former founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, Richard Gage, he was the one that promoted the documentary. So it came from a really reputable recommendation and source there. But you know, I've still got my questions. You know, like, would Israel really allow this to happen? Could it really be an inside job? So I've got some hard questions as well for John today, and I can't wait to have this conversation. Mr. John Hankey, thanks for coming on the show today. Glad to have you.
Hey, Jeremy, I'm so glad to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity.
So first things first, why would you take the time? You know, I think you came out with this or began work on it rather quickly right after October 7th. And want to get a little bit of your background on why this was so important for you to put together a short film on it.
Well, because of the genocide that is taking place in Gaza, which, you know, it started October 8th, right? That just, I think October 8th, they may have killed 10,000 civilians. Certainly in the week following October 7th, they killed 10,000 civilians. So that was the real fire burning behind me saying, you have to, you have to tell the truth about this story, given that what was also very, very clear. I mean, on October 7th, I was hearing from what I considered very, very reputable sources that the Israeli military had completely disappeared for 6 hours. And the more I looked into it, the more I found out that that was a very, very conservative estimate. In the video, the New York Times quotes an Israeli reservist. He's a captain, I think, in the reserves. And, you know, all of these soldiers are on social media, and there were the women. The Israelis had a small, I'm kind of inclined to call it a shack, but there were 30 women working 3 shifts a day and monitoring the cameras and all of the sensors, all the electronic sensors that monitor the fence between Gaza and Israel constantly. And these people were all on their social media. And, you know, the settlers or the Israeli civilians who were living near the Gaza Strip, and settlers is probably not the right word for them. Kibbutzniks is really the right word, right? The people living in these kibbutzes were, you know, on social media. They before anybody touched the wall for an hour, before Hamas began crossing the wall, these guys were on social media yelling and screaming about, here it comes, here it comes, here it comes. We can hear the explosions as they're blowing holes in the walls. Everybody in Israel, and you can ask yourself why Hamas would do this, but an hour before anybody touched the wall, crossed the wall, they were shooting rockets into the air that were visible very, very, very clearly and frighteningly in Jerusalem. Now, it turns out these are just fireworks. I have never seen I saw one picture of very, very minimal damage done to an automobile by one of these skyrockets after it, came to Earth. But the point is that there was all of this alarm, and all of it, much of it was reflected on social media. And so I was mentioning how the New York Times has this rather, probably 50, 60, 80 words focused on this one Israeli reservist commander who, after 6 hours, said, he's sitting there waiting to be mobilized and waiting to be mobilized and waiting to be mobilized. And he's doing this for 7 hours before he finally calls up his men and says, come on, let's go. We're not going to wait anymore. I can't get, none of my supervisors are answering the phone, but we see all of this stuff. And so they mobilize themselves and they get their weapons and they get in their cars and they drive, and there's nobody. They drive down to the Gaza border and there's no military presence. 7 hours. And this guy's telling it to the New York Times and how shocked he is. In the video, there's also a CNN, and it's the CNN graphic that shows a couple of Israeli soldiers at a bomb shelter. Every bus stop near Gaza has a bomb shelter associated with it. And so these soldiers are evacuating people who had taken shelter in one of these bomb shelters. And the graphic says that it's 7 hours after the fighting began. Well, I'm not sure that the fighting ever began. It gets to be a very vague term, because if the army never showed up for 7 hours, when did the fighting begin? But anyway, it became very, very clear that there had been a stand down, and then the more, I mean, it's not even digging isn't the right word. I'm just paying attention, right? I'd see a link, somebody would post a YouTube link, and I'd go to it, and then you look on the right and there's more. Everybody has the experience of going to YouTube, and on the right side there are videos, often similar videos like it, and I would be clicking on some of those. And I mean, interrupt me anytime you want. I'm not even sure that I remember the question that I'm answering at the moment.
Well, no, the original question is, what led you to be so interested in to take the time and the energy to do this? And you answered it. You said due to a genocide that you feel was going on starting the next day. And that's reason enough. Anybody can understand that.
Well, but hang on. And Thank you for reminding me. And let me just wrap that up, which is to say that you have this genocide, and at the same time, without looking, all of this evidence is showing up on my desktop that the military had a stand down for 7 hours. And then they launch a genocide to kill, all of these civilians. Right? I don't know what the figure is. It's 30,000 at least. And
36,000 today.
Is it that high? Oh my goodness. But so the fact that the genocide is being justified by what is very, very clearly a false flag, that there was this massive stand down for 7 hours, and so that story wasn't being told. The story of the massive stand down for 7 hours was not being told, and so I felt like it was my responsibility, being an experienced researcher and filmmaker, to make sure that everybody knew that the excuse for the genocide was completely false. And then I don't remember how long. It wasn't long. There's one of my favorite spokespeople. His name is Jeffrey Sachs, and he's a Columbia professor. He's a UN sustainability official. The Lancet, the most prestigious medical magazine on the planet, hired him to lead their investigation into the origins of COVID.
I remember this.
And he concluded, he contacted the Chinese and he said, give me this, and this. I'd like to see the report on this program and the report on that program and all the details on all these various programs. And the Chinese flooded him with everything that he asked for. And then he asked the United States to provide him information with 350 biological weapons programs that they have, and the United States provided him with nothing. And on
Of
that
course not.
basis, he came to the conclusion that COVID originated in a U.S. weapons lab, which is interesting because I came to the same conclusion based on the fact that they came up with an mRNA vaccine, which is a 30-year project, and they came up with it in 2 days, they say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but I have a credential to teach biology. I'm very good at science as well, and with a emphasis on biology. And without going on and on into it, you may have noticed that there hasn't been an mRNA vaccine that has been developed since the first mRNA. There hasn't been a second mRNA vaccine because it was a moon project, right? It's a Manhattan project. It's that sort of generation, decade-long focus with an enormous infusion of funds in order to create, I don't know why it had to be an mRNA vaccine. The Chinese seem to have come up with a very serviceable and effective standard vaccine, right? Where you get the virus, you kill it, and right, that's typically the way
The
that you
old
make a
school
vaccine.
vaccines, right?
I'm sorry?
The old school vaccines.
Yes, and that's what the Chinese have produced, and the Chinese have had 4,000 COVID deaths since day one, and the United States has had, I don't know, 1,200,000, something like 200,000, something like that. We hit 1,000,000 a long time ago. Anyway, so I didn't see anybody anywhere in any publication on the planet saying that this was obviously an inside job, that the defenses stood down for 7 hours, and that's, I mean, that's 9/11 all over again. Anyway, let me let you ask another question, or I can just rattle on if you
Well,
like.
no, it's okay. There was one reporter that early on was saying these things, and her name is Efrat Finigson. She lives in Israel. Just like everybody else, she had to be a part of the IDF for 2 years. She had interviewed people early on that were in those towers that were supposed to, the comms people. And one of them there was this key guy, I can't think of his name, who was in charge of intercepting Hamas transmissions. And he was told a couple weeks before October 7th that to stand down. And he'd been sending stuff up the chain saying, we're going to be attacked. We're going to be attacked. And he's crying in the interview, saying, if they would have listened to me and not told me to stand down, this never would have happened. But when I reached out to Efrat, who interviewed him, and I said, listen, I would love to have you on my show. Would you be willing? She said, no, this is so hot right now. If you are claiming it's a false flag and you're an Israeli, I don't want to put my family in that kind of danger. So I'm not taking any interviews. So my question, John, is you've put a lot of that type of content from Israelis who are calling out their own government, saying this was an inside job. You've put that into your video. Do you know of any backlash that's happened to whether it's the kibbutzers or the IDF people that are speaking out, or even reporters in your own research, where they've suffered because of what they've been willing to say to the public?
Well, it's a little bit complicated.
Okay.
In my video, there is one male soldier who is just, he's furious. He shouts at the camera that this was an inside job, that he worked on the Gaza border, and he says, do you know how long it takes for a helicopter? The largest military base in Israel is a mile from the Gaza border. There's 28 helicopters stationed there, 50 tanks, I don't know how many hundred soldiers. And do you know how long it takes for one of those helicopters to arrive, right? The pilots have to get in, they have to start the motors, they have to fly off, and it takes 5 minutes. And it took them 7 hours, and he says that's what you call an inside job.
Yeah.
He didn't give his name, and his post has been taken down from TikTok, but people got it and they reposted it and reposted it and reposted it. So, there's 150 reposts of his declaration, but I was unable to find the original. Then there was this woman who doesn't give her name, and you can tell she's very, very concerned about hiding her identity. And she writes, she doesn't show her face. And she says that, she was in Israeli intelligence, and she was in Jerusalem, and she saw the rockets at 6 o'clock in the morning, and she knew that there was an attack underway at 6 o'clock in the morning, and that the IDF didn't respond for 7 hours. And she says, she makes the point that she was very familiar with the defenses that are in place on the Gaza border. And shall I review that for just a second?
Yeah, and I've got a question to keep that I want you, when you're answering about or talking about the Gaza border itself, your film, and I encourage everybody to watch. What's the official title, real quick? The official title.
October 7th - Inside Job.
Okay, and I'm going to include a link to it in our description.
Okay, very good. And if you Google John Hankey in quotes, and then October 7th in quotes, and Inside Job in quotes, you'll find it posted all over BitChute, and it's all over the place.
Yeah, there's a lot of copies of it on Rumble as well. Does that bother you when other people are uploading it?
To say the very least, oh, no.
Okay.
Right? The genie's out of the bottle. The toothpaste is out of the tube. You're never getting this back in.
Right.
And
so you didn't do this. You didn't do this to copyright it and make money on it. You did this to get as a PSA.
I've never done anything to copyright it or make money on it. And I've got 10 videos, all of which, some of which took years to make. The one on Gaza, I worked on day and night, 7 days a week for 5 months until it was done, because this story had to get told.
Yes.
And with all the payback I get is maybe that my kids will inherit a better world, which, by the way, that's not a minor thing.
That's a big deal. Yeah. That's worth more than some more money in the bank. But to get back to the original question, as you're telling us about the defense structure that the wall actually is, and you won't find a better description of it than in the video itself. You take about the first 7 minutes talking about that. But is it you said it's a 20-mile long wall. Is that the entire length of the Gaza border, or are there some? Okay. So it covers the whole thing.
It covers the entire Gaza area.
Okay.
From the Egyptian border up to the northern corner and then out to the Mediterranean Sea. There is no part of Gaza that is not enclosed in this 20-foot high wall. And it's 30 feet deep to prevent people from tunneling under.
Wow.
Yes.
Well, give us a general outline of the kind of defense it actually has. You just said, 20 foot high, 30 feet deep. What else?
Well, and let me say that PBS hired a couple of Washington Post reporters to go and answer this question of, how was it possible? Right. Both of these veterans that I mentioned, Israeli army veterans, talk about how this is the most heavily surveilled and heavily defended piece of real estate on the planet by many, many times. And so Washington Post reporters were sent by PBS to try to answer the question of how was it possible. And they weren't able to answer that question. What they did do, however, is they were shocked at how Hamas had posted all of these videos showing their preparation for the invasion, and they had posted them online, and they had posted them weeks and months before the attacks. And in fact, the New York Times reveals that Israeli intelligence had the 43-page plan for the attack in their hand a year before it happened. But there's this wall. It's 20 feet high. It's steel reinforced concrete. It is, in my observation, impenetrable. Hamas never succeeded in making an opening in that wall that was larger than 2 feet wide. And you see them blowing up these small spaces, and you see guys walking through single file. The problem is that after you've walked through this small hole, you get to the other side and you wait for the bus, or you hitchhike, or what are you supposed to do if you can't get a truck through? You haven't done very much. You can now walk to whatever it is that your target, or maybe bring a bicycle through. Or I guess they could have brought motorcycles through. I don't remember seeing a motorcycle being brought through any of these holes, or a bicycle for that matter. It turns out that I found this Israeli television video, right? And it's the most solid government-backed Israeli television station. It's I-24, I believe, is what it's called.
Okay.
And everybody in Israel, right? Everybody in Israel are veterans. It's a really similar situation to 9/11, which is that in my experience, everybody connected to air defense knew that 9/11 was an inside job on 9/12 at the latest. And then they started telling their families and friends and relatives. But, the veterans involved when the active military people involved in air defense knew that 9/11 had to have been an inside job. And everybody in Israel is a veteran, right? Every single person. Unless you're one of the super religious Orthodox rabbis, they don't have to do military service for some reason, right? They're the main justifiers and flag wavers for war, but they don't have to serve. Never mind. Anyhow, so that the veterans in Israel are very, very much aware of the stand down that took place. So you got this wall. I don't know how I wandered off, but the Washington Post had all of this video and showing all of the preparations. Every couple of hundred yards in this 23-mile long border, you have a machine gun turret, right? It's monstrous. It's very, very, very substantial. And in between these turrets, you have these very, very tall monitoring towers. They're like a radio tower. And they have cameras on them. They have laser movement detectors on them. They have night cameras. And they also have these balloons with very, very super high def cameras that allow them to see what Hamas is doing anywhere in Gaza. These cameras can see and did and filmed the activities in a Hamas training camp that was on the Mediterranean Sea, which is as far away as you can get. And so you then have, we mentioned these women, and I called it a shack. You have something that probably made of wood. It's very insubstantial. It holds about 30 women per shift, and they watch the television monitors and the other monitors that are in effect of all of these cameras, and they relay any activity that they see, they relay it on up the line. And the morning of the attacks, they saw Hamas coming from 7 miles away at least. And they reported it when they were 7 miles away, and they reported it when they were 6 miles away, and they reported it when they started blowing these small holes in the fence, and they reported it as they were crossing the fence, and they reported it as they approached the little shack that these women were in and opened the doors and started killing all of these women. Now, these are Israeli citizens, these are Israeli soldiers, and they're reputable people, and they're somewhat influential to the point that you will see in my video that these women went to the Israeli news media and demanded and succeeded, and achieved getting their story told in the Israeli news about how they did all of this stuff and about how all of their careers, they had been told, don't worry, when you see them coming, the helicopters will be on you in a minute and you will be rescued. You have nothing to worry about. And so, the women, when they saw them coming, could have gotten up and run and they could have survived, but they didn't. If they had been armed, they could have defended themselves. I haven't seen a Hamas video yet that has more than a dozen people in it, as I've just related. They were never able to get anything but guys walking through the fence single file. I started talking about this film clip that I discovered on I-24, the most mainstream government-approved television station, and they are talking about what all the veterans know, that Hamas is approaching the fence. There's an explosion. They show body camera footage of these guys in these trucks heading towards the fence, and you see, and they tell you, look, and you see an explosion at the fence, and they tell you, the narrators say, that it's another 7 minutes before this truck reaches the point at which that explosion took place, or reaches the fence. And then they show these trucks, and they're not going through one of these exploded walls. They're going through a gate. And there are guys escorting them through this gate, who look like Mossad. They look like Israeli intelligence. They certainly, they don't look like any Hamas fighter that,
Let me stop you there, John, because if everything you're saying is true, and that this report broke out on the most government approved mainstream news channel, how is the government of Israel, that wants to protect their narrative that we were attacked, we weren't expecting it, we may have dropped the ball, hey, that happens, but this was something we weren't expecting and we must retaliate? Well, all of that falls to shit the moment that it becomes an inside job. So how are they able to manage? Because in America, when 9/11 happened, you were made out to be a social pariah. The media was very controlled on it. Like after the first day, everybody got on the same page. It was Islamic terrorism, Osama bin Laden. And if you said otherwise, you were made out to be a social outcast, regardless of your political affiliation. What are they doing in Israel to manage this? Because it sounds like they're putting other truthful narratives on mainstream television.
Well, you have to understand, in the video clip, the narrators don't say, "Oh my God, look at there's a friggin' gate." They didn't go through holes that they exploded in the wall. They went through gates that were supposed to have, tanks and multiple machine gun turrets, and hundreds of soldiers should have been protecting this gate 24/7, 365 days a year. The narrators don't say anything. They pretend that it wasn't there. And as you've made a couple of references to how the woman that you contacted said, "Oh no, I can't do that anymore. They'll kill my family." And in this country, you were there. You were much younger, right? 19 years younger. But
yeah.
On shortly after 9/11, Bill Maher's, who I'm not a fan of, but the point is that he had a show, and he said that Bush was calling the hijackers of the planes cowards. And Bill Maher said, well, they gave their lives for their cause, and you can call them psychopaths, and you can call them lots and lots and lots of other things, but cowards doesn't seem like the right word. And he didn't work for 10 years. Those words finished coming out of his mouth, and he didn't work for 10 years. So you didn't have, all praise Richard Gage and the rest of those people. You didn't have, and you still don't. I mean, come on. It's 60 years since the Kennedy assassination. Find me somebody in the mainstream media saying that the Kennedy assassination was an inside job.
Only one, and he no longer works for Fox News. I don't know.
Well, right.
Tucker Carlson started saying it out loud, and he was canned.
Yeah, he was. I think he was canned for not supporting the war in Ukraine, but it doesn't matter.
Both.
It was a combination of things. Anyway, certainly he wasn't canned for the reasons that they gave. But so that answers your question, right? Everybody in Israel knows what happened. The way every vet in the United States, the day after, certainly everybody connected with air defense. Oh man, every airline pilot in the United States, that's a lot of airline pilots, knew that September 11th was an inside job. I was on an airplane flight talking to a woman whose father was an airline pilot, and she was telling me how mad he gets when the subject comes up because it was so clear. And if you fly a plane, you know about the FAA, you know what FAA regulations are, and you know that if you're in a passenger jet, you can't go off course for 10 seconds before they have scrambled the jets to intercept you, much less 53 minutes or whatever. But so I'll tell you what, there are lots and lots of people who said that 9/11 was done by Israel, and there's powerful evidence. Certainly, who benefited, cui bono. What the United States didn't benefit by having a war against Iraq. Israel is the only government on the planet that had any interest in taking down the government in Iraq. But my response had always been, well, yeah, but is Bush Jewish? If he is, I don't know about it. And is Cheney Jewish? If he is, I don't know about it. And I didn't think Donald Rumsfeld was Jewish. So I was reticent to suggest that Israel was behind 9/11. Well, I'm no longer reticent to suggest that. It seems to me, I mean, if they would do it to themselves, right, which you have on October 7th, if they would do it to themselves, of course they would do it to, right? If they're willing to kill, and so let me talk about that for a second, but if they're willing to kill Israeli soldiers and civilians in order to justify their genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza, if they'd be willing to do that, of course they'd be willing to kill, 1,500 Americans, bringing down the Twin Towers. And
Right.
Let me make this point and then move into the Israel point. But on September 11th, the two planes hit the Twin Towers and killed a couple hundred people. I don't think I've seen an estimate higher than as high as 300 of people who were killed by the two initial plane crashes. Well,
You mean
that's
before
not enough.
before the buildings fell?
Before the buildings fell.
Okay.
Before the buildings fell. Well, but you see, when the buildings fell, architects and engineers all over the planet started to say, wait a minute, that jet fuel can't melt steel beams. Jet fuel can't melt steel beams. It's not a complicated concept. And lots of people saw the buildings fall and said there were explosives involved. You couldn't prove that until people got a hold of the film of Building 7 coming down. But when you see Building 7, which hadn't been hit by any planes, coming down, and every demolition expert on the planet looks at that video and says, that's a controlled demolition. What do you mean? What? Some a trash can caught on fire and the building collapsed into its own footprint? No. That was a controlled demolition. So the point was that the planes crashing didn't kill enough people. They had to bring the buildings down in order to kill a number of Americans that could then, be considered as justifying a war against Iraq, even though there wasn't a shred of evidence suggesting that they were involved in any way, shape, or form. Right? I mean, if everybody, all human beings are familiar with if you're mad enough, you may not have the patience to wait to find the person who's genuinely guilty. You're liable to lash out at something just because you have all this pent-up anger.
Right.
And that's what 9/11 was about. Well, so on October 7th, if you look at all the videos, the New York Times quoted a member of the Southern Command, which are the guys who were right there on that's the Gaza border. The Southern Command is the Gaza border. And their estimate at, I think, noon was that there were 200 Hamas fighters, not 1,500, not 1,000, not 800, 200 Hamas fighters. And if you look at the videos, as I have done as extensively as I was able to, that is not a conservative estimate. It's a very generous estimate, but it's not off by a factor of 10. It's off maybe by a factor of 50%. But 200 guys whose main job is to capture hostages. Who's going to be? Nobody was there killing civilians, right? You see all of these videos. And you see these guys driving around with trucks with guns. And there's one video in mine where they drive into one of the cities near the border, and it's a city, and they get out with their guns, and they're walking around, and they're looking for police, and they're looking for the military, and they can't find them, but they're not running into buildings and killing civilians. And, there's civilians on the street for a second before they all dash indoors, but I have not seen any concerted effort by Hamas to slaughter Israelis massively, and there's all sorts of evidence and testimony.
Let me ask you a question about that, because
Sure.
sometimes when you get these big personalities like Elon Musk or Ben Shapiro, and I know Ben Shapiro is going to be heavily, biased and all that, but they will say, we went over to Israel, the government took us behind closed doors and showed us the videos of what actually happened, and it was mortifying. It was awful, of Hamas just brutally slashing apart these people and women who were pregnant and everything else. And it sounds horrible to hear them say that. So you've not seen any of that type of video at all?
That's correct.
Do you think that this is part of the lie to bring major American personalities over there? I don't know if they're paying them off or what, but they're making these claims that the videos of the murders exist. And I want to be careful too, because if they are floating around, those videos online or otherwise, and you're saying that they don't exist, but they do, well, it debunks you or debunks me for saying it.
Well, it's good to be cautious, yeah, and we all make mistakes, and it's possible to be misinformed, and all you have to do is miss one video, but as you were mentioning this, you can see John Kennedy's getting his brains blown out. Oh, this is what I wanted to say. But Joe Biden stands up and gives a speech that he saw the video of the babies, of the slaughtered babies, and the next day his advisors stand up and say, no, he didn't. he didn't see any video like that. There is no video like that. Don't stop asking us to show you the video, because there's no such thing.
Yeah, they said beheaded babies and babies in ovens and just these.
Yes.
Horrific.
And Biden said that he saw it. And then it turns out that he didn't. So that, Elon Musk says that he saw it. Well, I don't know what to say.
Well, Ben Shapiro put out a photo. I don't know if you saw this, a photo of a baby that had been cooked. And then upon closer inspection, and I saw that he put it on his Twitter. You may know what I'm talking about. And then you look closer and you saw that like the doctor had like 6 fingers, and you realize this is an AI image. Well,
and inside Israel, everybody in Israel is not crooked. Lots of people in Israel are interested in the truth. And you have people in any case. In the Kennedy assassination is a good example that on the day Kennedy was shot, you had a bunch of Dallas police, and they're just wandering around trying to do their job. They're not involved in anything. And, so Seymour Weitzman finds a Mannlicher Carcano. I'm sorry. He finds a Mauser on the 6th floor of the book depository, and he says so. And he won't shut up about it. He put it in his Warren Commission affidavit. And on like that, right? That you have these true statements coming from guys who they're not trying to make any great revelation. They're just trying to do their job. They're doing what they do every day, which is, see facts and report them. Anyway, looking at because right, they've done autopsies on all of the bodies at this point, and there are no dead babies. There are no dead children. I don't think there's a dead child under 2. And there's like 15 between 2 and 15 years old. There's a small number of young people between 2 years old and 15 years old. And, this isn't in my video, and I'm trying my best to recollect. But if you don't mind, I want to come back to this point that I was trying to work towards, that
okay.
When the planes crashed, that wasn't enough dead Americans. They had to send in 200 firemen and then blow up the buildings, right? They could have waited. They could have waited for the people to get out, right? There were all those people were trying to get out. There were relatively few people trapped above the explosions who had no access to getting out. and they didn't have to send the firemen in just before they blew the buildings up, but they wanted to inflate the real number of dead, and so they did that. Right? They blew the buildings up before people got out, and they waited for the firemen to get in before they blew the buildings up. Well, in Israel, let me throw in quickly that in my video, you get to hear from four women hostages, and all of them talk about how well they were treated. Two of them, one of them is a young woman, she and her mother had never been treated so nicely in Israel by Israeli men. They said that for their captors, women were queens, and they treated them like queens. And another woman, Jasmine Porat, was in the kibbutz, and she talks about how nicely they were treated. And this old woman, looks like she's 80, and as she's being released to the Red Cross, she stops and she turns around and she takes the hand of her captor and says shalom, and then goes off. And they asked her, why did you do that? And she said, because they treated us so well. So that you got this dichotomy. You have people saying, oh, we have pictures of barbecued babies, and then you have these genuine, nobody contests whether these women were hostages or not. That is not an issue.
Well, let me ask you a question right there. So why wouldn't they, if they want to inflate the numbers to create anger among both Americans, pro-Israel Americans, and Israel, why wouldn't they just have Hamas just kill all the hostages, or at least more of them? If Mossad and Shin Bet and others are controlling Hamas to a large degree, why would they treat them? Why would they? They would rather, I would think, have the hostages keep them alive, because then the war can keep going. But do some mean things to them, torture them a little bit, then let them go. Because
I think the Hamas leadership, and that this can be a difficult thing to discern. Who is somebody who is controlled, manipulated, and so on, and who is somebody who's actually an operative, and how do you tell the difference? And without going into huge detail, I would suggest that it can be very, very difficult to tell the difference. I think that the average Hamas on the street is probably not a monster, and not under the control of the Mossad. And they thought, that they're upholding their religious beliefs, and so they believe that all women should be treated as being holy, and so they treat them that way. And then you have psychopaths of one stripe and another. But I'm trying to work my way to how they inflated the number killed. And one of the ways that they inflated the number killed is that these women who were, the spotters, they're called, the women who were manning these television screens that were looking at the cameras. And, normally they would send a signal to one of these machine gun towers that's every 100 yards. And in my video, you get to see that one of those had not been, one of them was manned, and just turns these four guys ride up on motorcycles. It might be six guys on three motorcycles, and they just turn them to smoke. And that would have happened. There weren't that many. If you take the Israeli estimate, the Israeli military estimate of 200 guys, how long does it take? All of these different machine gun towers to kill 200 guys? Not 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. So the women thought that they were protected, and they should have been protected, and they're manning their stations, and they're not abandoning and running away to safety. And the Hamas people come in the door, and they killed half of them, and they took the other half hostage, and some of them played dead under dead bodies and survived, and are complaining to the local, to the Israeli media. And the Israeli media, I think, were shamed into covering it. And these women are furious, and they're saying, we were left to be slaughtered like lambs to the slaughter. So one of the ways they inflated the number of dead was by putting these women right where they were. the story, it's in my video, the story comes out that in the middle of the night, you mentioned probably one of the sources for this. There's all of this Hamas radioactivity going on because they're getting ready for the events of the morning. And all of this is being picked up by the intelligence people. And there was a meeting of high-ranking military people in the middle of the night. And according to the LA Times, decisions were made that they were going to move more troops to the southern base. Well, that obviously is false. What the moves that were made were moving people from out of the situation. But these women, one of the survivors says, well, if these guys were meeting and if they knew this was happening, why didn't they tell us? Mm-hmm. And the first time I saw this story, I don't know if people are familiar, but there was a music concert, peace, love, groovy music concert going on. And 2 days before the attack, they moved the event closer to the wall. The night before the attack, they have all of this, they're having meetings and they have all these alerts going on. And survivors from the music event have hired a lawyer and they sued and they said, if you knew, why didn't you tell us? Right? If this was going on at 2:00 in the morning, you could have told us and we could have been gone at 6:00 in the morning. And instead you told us nothing. And then, right, so I don't know the time that the events that I'm about to describe took place, but at some point, the people supervising this inside job of an attack, the people who were the Israeli Mossad, do you know what Mossad stands for? Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. Now, I got that from an Israeli source, ISIS. So that while you're trying to figure out why ISIS has never attacked Israel, maybe it's because ISIS stands for Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. And so ISIS has never attacked Israel.
And isn't the old motto for Mossad, by deception thou shalt do war?
Oh, I'm sure. It sounds familiar, but so
they try to deny that now. They've changed it, but yeah.
So yeah. The issue that I'm trying to address is how do you inflate the number of casualties? And on 9/11, they did it by blowing up the buildings before the people could get out, and by sending in the firemen and then blowing them up. In Israel, they left these women soldiers completely undefended, sitting ducks, and the women are furious about the fact that this was done. The IDF had all this warning about the attacks coming, and there were no steps taken to evacuate these women or to send in helicopters, as they had promised them during their entire careers that they would send in helicopters to rescue them. So at some point during the day, the people supervising this thing decided we need more people dead. And I don't think this is a fact that should be regarded as in dispute. You'll see it in my video. There's all these quotes from people in the Israeli military saying that at this music festival, they sent in the helicopters, and the helicopter pilots say that they slaughtered civilians in their cars. And you might wonder, you might scratch your head and say, huh? How is it possible that these guys are saying this at all? They're saying it in the media, and the media is printing it. And the answer is that the decision had been made at higher levels, at the highest levels. But they push these guys out to say, oh, yeah, we did it on our own. And they say, we did it on our own. And then there are these photographs, videos showing, I counted them, 200 cars completely burned to a crisp. I believe most of them had people inside of them. And Hamas didn't have the weapons to do that. Every single one of those 200 burnt out cars was burnt out by Israeli helicopters who said that they did it. And then you have back at the kibbutz, 112
Wouldn't that make the pilots of the helicopters, if they're claiming they murdered Israeli citizens on their own, that makes them murder? Like, wouldn't they be tried for treason?
By whom? By the people, by the guys who ordered them to do it, right?
Yeah, but the government has to keep up appearances. They can't.
No,
They
they
can't.
don't. You listen to yourself. The government. When has the government ever tried to keep up appearances about 9/11 or about the Kennedy assassination? They don't care. They gave us the Zapruder film, which shows Kennedy's brains being blown violently out the back of his head, showing in the most clear terms that he was killed by a shot from the front, when everybody knows that Oswald was behind him. So the notion of keeping up appearances it's a delicate situation, right? As long as you have an iron grip on everybody in Israel is afraid to tell the truth, not just the media.
Okay, the biggest difference.
Just the media. Everybody is afraid to tell the truth.
The biggest difference in what you said and JFK. Well, I said the pilots themselves, these Israeli IDF pilots, are coming out saying we shot our own citizens and no one told us to do it. That would be like if the day JFK died, if you had Dallas police officers saying we shot Kennedy, nobody told us to do it, and then nothing happens to those police officers. Like there's two different things here a little bit.
Well, I think that it's the fog of war, right? And with JFK, you don't have the fog of war.
Yeah, there's one man
right?
killed. Okay, yeah.
One man killed. And in this, it's not like it was on the front page, and it's not like it was in the first paragraph. And I don't even know that it was from the major newspapers. I believe that it was, these quotes come from an Hebrew-only version of the news, right? It's not Haaretz or the Times of Israel, which I believe are the two main, most well-known and most well-read and globally well-read papers. So it comes out rather. It's the you've seen Loose Change.
Yeah, I've seen so much on 9/11. Yes, I saw it, but it's been years.
Well, the first version of Loose Change and the subsequent versions have not been better, and the third one I think is terrible compared to the first one. But in the first one, they talk about how two of the planes landed in Ohio and the passengers deplaned and were held incommunicado for I don't know how many hours and were then released. And this was covered by an Ohio newspaper. This was reported in an Ohio newspaper.
I remember this, yeah.
Right. And in the murder of John Kennedy Jr., you had lots of stuff that appeared in the Boston Globe and never appeared anywhere else. That, if you were paying close attention, would make you say, oh, my goodness, they murdered him. If you're reading the Boston Globe, you might draw that conclusion. You certainly would see all sorts of red flags. How can that possibly be the case, right? That they didn't. The Boston Globe covered the fact that they didn't send any craft to the crash site for 15 and a half hours. And I had the head of the California Coast Guard tell me that they knew instantly, within 3 feet, that any plane crashes that has a transponder on it, that the FAA system tells you within 3 feet. If you're the Coast Guard, they tell you within 3 feet the location of that plane crash. So, it's how I do what I do, right? It's the fact that bits and pieces show up here and there and every place else. And if you have the patience and the stick-to-itiveness and the doggedness, that's the word I'm looking for, to keep going and keep pounding and keep hammering and keep digging, you can eventually put all of these pieces together and that when you look at them all together, you say, oh my God, how could they be so obvious? There was insider trading, right?
Tell me about that. That was a question I wanted to ask you.
Well, it's in the video that on 9/11 there was insider trading. Right. And in fact, I think I clipped it from a movie called Incontrovertible on 9/11. They have a 5-minute clip about the insider trading that took place in the United States. And, the investigation said, well, we found out that it wasn't ISIS, and that's when we stopped. We didn't try to find out who actually did it.
Yeah.
We just found out that they weren't terrorists. And so, oh, well, if it wasn't terrorists, then it's okay. And that's what happened in Israel, which is that, oh, you see the graphs. It's really, really, you have these moments of courage. But you mentioned, right, the woman who interviewed the guy who, with tears streaming down his face, talks about how he was told to abandon his position. And without running down the list, but you have a number, all sorts of different times and places, 9/11, JFK, and October 7th, where people stand up and make some heroic comments. And these two, I think one of them is New York Law School and the other one is Columbia Law School, something like that. And that, they're prestigious, they're tenured professors. And they published an article. And in the article, they show you this graph. And, the week before October 7th, insider or short selling, people betting that the market's going to crash, that the line is so slim you can't see it. And then in the week before October 7th, the line, goes all the way. I'm missing a finger here. There we go. it fills the screen.
Sure.
The measure of how the quantity of insider of short selling, and for them, the thing that was decisive. Right, you can go down to the stock market and you can bet that such and such a stock is going to go down during this period. And if it doesn't go down, you have to pay. And if it does go down, you get to collect. It's just like the racetrack. But the longer the period is, the more exposure you have to having to pay. And so these guys placed bets that were good for like 2 weeks. And for these two professors, law professors, and one of them was a former Securities Exchange Commission official. So, this guy, he couldn't possibly be more well qualified. And they said that for them, that was the decisive factor, that they placed these bets. They placed them just before October 7th, and the bets expired 2 weeks later. So these guys had inside information about a very, very precise nature about when the attacks were going to take place. But so you have all of these similarities with 9/11, the insider trading, the fact that, well, the lying and the stand down, the incredible, the insane, the totally unbelievable stand down, and the steps that they took to inflate the number of casualties by sending in the helicopters to slaughter these people. Now, let me throw this in quickly. Oh, and at the kibbutz, right? This from an Israeli newspaper article quoting the witness about how all of these hostages were in these houses, and the Israeli tanks fired shells and killed everybody. And they'd fire a tank shell into the house and kill everybody. And one of the witnesses in the videos was standing there and watched the house that she had managed to escape from. And I forget how many people she said were in the house. 20 is a pretty solid guess. And, people are yelling and screaming, and they fire in a tank shell, and it's silence. Killed everybody in the place. So that really, between the women who they set up to be murdered, right, the women soldiers who were set up to be murdered, and the people that they killed with tank shells at the kibbutz, and the people that they slaughtered with the helicopters, I would guess that 90% of the people who died on October 7th were slaughtered by the Israeli military.
Well, you make a really strong case with all these points, especially the compounding effect of all of them.
Yes.
Let's take 3 minutes here, and I want to hear two things from you. One, inside jobs are done for a reason, and I'm sure it's beyond just a few people doing insider trading. What is, in your opinion, what is the government of Israel really after? What do they want from all of this? And then two, what's next for you in terms of as a researcher, and what are you going to do next with all this?
Boy, I really appreciate that question. I'll try to answer it in 3 minutes.
Sorry.
In the video, I show you that the Rothschilds decided in 1829 that they had to have is Palestine. And they went to the Sultan of Turkey and they offered him some fabulous amount of money. They wanted Palestine. And the Sultan said, I don't sell my children. And so in the video, I try to show how they spent the next 1825, they spent the next 180 years conniving and conniving and conniving and conniving and conniving to get their hands on Palestine so that they could rename it Israel. And the Balfour Declaration, people are likely not familiar, but you can Balfour.
Most of my audience is very familiar.
Oh, all right. Well, but if you're not, you Google it or Wikipedia. It's just the British government sent a letter, and they didn't send it to the Zionists. They did not send it to the Jewish people anywhere. They sent it to Lord Rothschilds, saying, "We are giving you Palestine," which does John Kennedy, it's also in the video. 1939, John Kennedy wrote a letter to his father saying, "Nice of them to give away Palestine. It wasn't theirs. How the hell does Britain get to give Palestine to the Rothschilds when it wasn't theirs in the first place?" But so the Rothschilds are behind this thing, and what I kind of want to do. 50 years I'm researching the Kennedy assassination. And, for 50 years I hear people say, "Oh, Israel did it, Israel did it." And I never saw any evidence, no substantial evidence to anywhere near substantial to say that Israel did the Kennedy assassination. But
sure.
50 years of research, and I collect all this stuff, and I find that all of these guys, all of these highest level CIA people who were all in Dealey Plaza and were involved in the assassination, and they all worked for a guy named Averell Harriman. And so I investigate Averell Harriman, and I find out, well, he was with Brown Brothers Harriman. He was the junior guy in Brown Brothers Harriman, which was bought by the Rothschilds in 1837.
Right there, same time.
Brown Brothers has been a minion of the Rothschilds, and Harriman was a minion of Brown Brothers. And so the trail goes back. It doesn't go back to Israel. It goes back to the founders of Israel, who are the Rothschilds. And this one should blow you away. I don't remember that it's in the video. It's in my breakthrough video. Auschwitz was run by I.G. Farben, the largest, richest. They were a chemical arms manufacturer, right? They're the military-industrial complex. They're the largest member of the military-industrial complex in Germany at the time, and they ran Auschwitz. 20 directors of I.G. Farben were put on trial at Nuremberg for their role, and the headquarters is this palatial estate. The I.G. Farben wanted to build something that would put everybody on the planet to shame, right? It makes Rockefeller Center look like a hot dog stand. And they hired the most artistic and famous and talented artists to make this thing into a palace, and it's built on the Rothschild estate. Mm-hmm. You won't find that in Wikipedia. You have to Google it. But if you Google the name of the building and you read long enough and far enough to find out where it was built, you'll find out that it was built on the Rothschild estate. Well, so I.G. Farben, the Rothschilds ran the Holocaust. They wanted to drive Jewish people to Israel. And I'll assume we're out of time there, but
if we could, I would love to go more with you, go further on all this, but due to some personal things I've already committed to, I'm gonna have to go.
Me too.
But John, where would you like people to go? I know you have a YouTube channel at John Hankey. Is that the main place you'd like people to follow you, or where else?
I've only started using YouTube again because they stopped taking my stuff down. They used to always take my stuff down, and they still block me, right? You can't Google the title of my latest video and have it come up on a Google search.
Right.
But I don't know what's going on. Well, they're losing revenue to Rumble, and they're losing revenue to BitChute, and so maybe they're changing their tune a little bit. And if you want to buy something, that would be nice. Okay. You can buy something at Prime, Amazon Prime. You can buy a DVD of Breakthrough, and watch it for free on my YouTube channel, which is right at the Real History Channel 1, right? Something. No,
I'll put the link in the description. They'll see.
Okay, very good. Please. But so you can watch it for free and say, "Oh my God, when they take this down, I won't have access to it anymore. So I need to go to get Amazon Prime." And if you buy the DVD and stick it into your computer, all you got to do is open up the DVD, not as a DVD, but open it up as a file. And you can steal the largest file out of it, put it on your desktop, and it will play. And my email address is in the video. If you can't figure out how to make that work, send me an email and I will be happy to hook you up. But so then you can hand that to your grandkids. And I'm telling you, I'm a hardworking guy. I'm a talented and skilled guy. I spent 50 years making that thing. Your grandkids are going to want to see it. It's got lots of good stuff in it.
Well, John, thank you so much for your hard work, your research, and for enlightening us all about what's going on. We got to get closer and closer to the truth, and it doesn't come easy these days. So thank you for your work. And I'll have to have you back on as this story develops.
And we're winning. The Rothschilds used to completely own the United States and completely own all of Europe. And all of the rest of the world. They used Britain to dominate the entire globe, and they've lost. And they're losing. And they're losing in their war against the Palestinians. They're losing. So the good guys are winning. Yay.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, right.
All right, John. Well, Thank you so much again for coming on.
You,
and I will reach back out to you for when we have further updates on Israel. Okay. And I think you're a great resource. So I appreciate that.
Very good. It was a pleasure being here. Glad to know you.
Absolutely. Talk soon.